Welcome to the Town Builders podcast. I'm your host, Levi Wentz. Town Builders is produced by the NTBA, the National Town Builders Association, implementers of the new urbanism. Find out more at ntba.net. This podcast is sponsored by James Hardie, what the best are made of. James Hardie is America's #1 brand in siding. Their product is elegant and durable and is sure to elevate any building or development. So if you want to find out more, go to jameshardie.com or find them at your local building supplier. Hello, friends. Today's episode is one I've anticipated for a long time, as I've become intimate with his work in both theory and practice. I'm thrilled to be joined by Ross Chapin, an architect, author, and someone who is probably best known as the originator of the pocket neighborhood, clusters of cottage homes oriented around shared lawns or courtyards. Ross has spent his career designing at the intersection of public and private spaces. He calls this the scale of sociability, and his approach is grounded in a belief that people are naturally sociable, and through the right neighborhood design, community can truly flourish. Working at this scale, Ross has been able to reshape the national conversation around what it means to live in community. In this episode, we dive deep, not only into the origin story of pocket neighborhoods and how Ross helped them regain national recognition, but also into the timeless design principles and cultural values that underpin them. We talk about Ross's early architectural influences, including the lasting impact of Christopher Alexander, and how Ross has taken his ideas and translated them into real, built environments across the country. Towards the end of the episode, Ross also offers some thoughtful insight into the town building movement and the often overlooked aspects of real estate development, asking how we can ensure these places that we work so hard to design and develop can remain healthy, welcoming, and resilient. Ross is a natural philosopher and has decades of wisdom in design and development that I think you will find both practical and deeply inspiring, as his love for his work and for others is apparent and infectious in all that he does. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ross Chapin. Well, Ross, your name has become almost synonymous with the term pocket neighborhood. You're Ross Chapin, the pocket neighborhood guy. And I can't think of another architect or designer that has so fully captured a single idea or segment of the market in that way. So to say that your work in this area has been impactful is a massive understatement. But I think also it's garnered a revival of cottage courts and micro neighborhoods and a rethinking of how we live together. It also dovetails so clearly with today's conversation around missing middle housing and affordability and this just deeper human desire, especially as the world gets more digital, for real community, real connection, those human experiences. So I'd love to go back to the beginning, actually. And was there a moment or maybe series of moments when this idea started to emerge in your thinking? Was it something that you were seeing in the built world, or maybe was it something that was missing in the conventional design that you were looking at?
This is a good question. There was a moment where I saw it and named it, but as I'm thinking about it, I have to go back to, and this is where I'm going to date myself, to the mid-'70s, where I was at the University of Minnesota doing my thesis. And I did it on basically an urban pocket neighborhood. And I was looking at how apartments could come together around some kind of shared space. And the apartments, there's another aspect. The apartments were flexible. And so they had two apartments with a in-between space that could be a studio and a two-bedroom, or a one-bedroom, so you could sort of flip that middle space, or you could have the whole thing working together. So I was looking at how housing could serve a range of people across a range of stages of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And later on in 1984, I entered a New American House competition. And the idea that I had and put together was to put together 6 townhomes in a typical urban neighborhood. This was in Minneapolis, the site that I chose. And the townhomes had a ground level flex space that could be an office, It could be a bedroom. It could be a boomerang kid coming back, in their mid-20s. And meanwhile, the living space is on the second and then up in the attic, third floor, second and a half store. And the 6 townhomes surrounded a shared commons. And there was an alley that had access to 6 garages. And it was one of the winners of the competition in 1984. So fast forward, I live on Whidbey Island in Langley, town of about 1,000 people, small.
What brought you from Minnesota out to the San Juan Islands?
Well, it's not the San Juan Islands.
Oh, this is south.
South of that, the largest island north of Seattle. It's about 30 miles away from Seattle. That's a long story, but basically I stumbled across it years before and recognized that there was something going on here with the people, that just the general culture that shared the kind of values and the kind of outlook that I really appreciated. And my wife and I wanted to live in a place where when we're walking around the neighborhood, we could greet people and have a basis for real conversation. Maybe see them in the post office or the grocery store, or out walking in the woods somewhere, or on the beach. And so this community is one that we recognized as a place that held those possibilities. If I were pursuing a career out of architecture school, I'd lived in San Francisco, in Minneapolis, in New York City, over in Germany. I would have been in a major metropolitan area. And we were pursuing a life rather than a career. And as it happened, career sort of formed around our life in a small town. So that's sort of the gist of it. This town is unusual in the sense of it's the small town that thinks it's big. We've got 1,000 people, right now 1,200 people. It's got a mayor, a city council, a city planner, engineer, a design review board. It's got all of what you would see for a larger town, larger city. And yet here we are, we're small. So back in the mid 1990s, we moved here in 1982. And in the mid 90s, there was a huge influx with retirees or people coming up from California and elsewhere to the island. And Microsoft was taking off, and the other online world, digital world, people were moving here. And the zoning that we had was straight out of 1980s playbook, 1970s playbook. Large lots, no alleys, but it pushed for garage fronted homes. It pushed for larger homes. And in the mid 90s, homes were ballooning in size, getting larger and larger. And yet in our town, 60%, roughly, maybe a little more, of households were 1 or 2 person households. Wow. And yet the zoning didn't acknowledge that, didn't allow for a housing type that would serve for smaller households. Think empty nesters, think single active people in their lives. Think, a young person getting started. No place for them.
Yeah, everything's zoned for suburban style.
Everything's suburban style.
Yeah.
And so there was a cluster of houses that were worker houses built in Seattle in the 19-teens. And they were tiny houses, and a developer took it on. And instead of tearing them down, he said, "These are lovely. Let's renovate them." And so he went ahead and renovated them. 400 square foot houses. Yeah, right. And they were laid out so that they had a shared space in the backyard. And whoa, they sold out.
The layout is they're all facing outwards, but their backyards have it.
They had a front door, but they had back porches.
Okay.
All of 400 square feet worth. And instead of having big private yards, they had a little tiny patch where they could do something. And then they had a shared space for picnic table, a tool shed, and so forth. It was a major story that year. This is whatever, probably 1990, early 90s, in the Christian Science Monitor, which is a national publication. And they were getting all kinds of response, very positive response. Well, let's do more of this. It's illegal. You can't. There's a minimum size. You've got to have, all kinds of parking. The banks will only lend toward houses that are ground-based. You could do condos, but this didn't quite relate. So Seattle put together a code, basically the cottage court code. And the way it goes in Seattle is that each of the neighborhoods had to approve it. All of the neighborhoods disallowed it, would not let it happen. And so it never happened in Seattle. And the city planner that we had connections in Seattle. This is here in Langley. And he brought it forward and said, well, what do you think? And so I was part of the planning team that helped develop the code for our little town that would craft it to what we wanted to do here. Mm-hmm. And because we're 1,000 people and everybody knew each other and there was trust among people here, we were able to create this code and get it passed. Turned out it was the first cottage court ordinance of this type in the country.
Wow.
Yeah. It hadn't existed. So that was intriguing.
I want to take a moment to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Harvey Points. Harvey Points are architectural designers that have worked on new urbanist projects nationwide. With a blend of bold ideas and thoughtful design, they have experienced site planning everything from infill projects in pocket neighborhoods to master planned communities. During the site planning process, they develop floor plans that tailor fit to each lot, giving you a comprehensive plan to take forward. They also provide realistic 3D renderings that help the whole team visualize the project from early stages, as well as being a great tool to get city planners and council members on board to approve your new development. We all want to see more unique communities built, and Harvey Points would love to assist you in that pursuit. Visit their website, harveypoints.com, that's Harvey with a B, or follow them on Instagram at Harvey Points. Okay, so maybe we can get some more history on this, because you coined the term pocket neighborhood and you wrote the book Pocket Neighborhoods, but the idea has existed for a long time. And in fact, I'm familiar with your work because my dad was intimately familiar with your work. And he grew up in Pasadena, where there was a lot of these courtyard housing and these bungalow cottage courts were just common, So he grew up with seeing that. But they're all early 1900s, most of them, when they were built. So what happened that we moved past that zoning ordinance and it became such a taboo that nowhere in the country was this allowed? How do we make that radical of a shift? Because there's examples of these pocket neighborhoods from older neighborhoods all across the country.
Yeah. By the way, these stories we're touching on here, that anybody that wants can read more depth into it in the book that I wrote called Pocket Neighborhoods, Creating Small-Scale Community in a Large-Scale World. Oh, there you go.
I'll just do the plug for you since I have the book right here. So
Great. Well, there's a lot more there. Let me bring in a couple other pieces, and then I'm going to double back and answer your question. So the code we got in place, and then what? Well, at the time, I had given a talk in Seattle to the Northwest Eco Building Guild, and there were a lot of people at this talk. And I was giving it, I think, on how to design and build better, smarter, smaller houses. My thing was right-sized. And, great. I spent years working closely with craftsmen, builders, and creating homes that really lived large, that really pulled their weight. And there was a developer in the audience, and he came up to me afterwards. This is Jim Souls. And he said, I love what you're talking about, but tell me about this code in Langley. I said, well, how do you know about it? Well, I'd follow this. And so we got to chatting, and he said, I'd like to come up to the island and talk with you and visit with you. So we came up to the island, and we talked about all kinds of things, including this new cottage court code called the Cottage Housing Ordinance that gave incentives to build in any residential zone twice the underlying density, prevailing density, if houses are limited in size, under about, I think it's 975 square feet. Why that? I don't know, but it was oriented around a shared commons, and parking is friendly. Parking is shielded from the street.
Interesting.
And he said, how about if we put it to a test? Let's demonstrate it. Let's do this. And so by the end of the afternoon, we shook hands and formed a partnership and created the cottage company. And we proceeded to buy 4 lots right here in town. And we developed 2 scenarios. One was standard. What would you do with 4 lots, 4 houses, garages, the usual thing. So we did the pro forma on that and said, okay, if we got it back up, we can probably sell the lot. But let's do another scenario. Let's design this as 8 cottages around a commons and all the things that the code had. But there was so much more to it. The code says one thing, but then I got into the nuance of what that is. And so we presented that to the planning advisory board, the 2 different scenarios, and they said yes to the cottage. They said yes to both of them, but they said yes to the cottage court approach. We went to the local bank, and the head of the local bank took this in, recognized my history with architecture and design and working with builders, and then Jim's long history with development and working as an urban planner as well. And they said, there are no comps on this, but we'll back you up. And so they loaned us more zeros than I'd ever seen before. I'd not, up to this point, I'd worked with building, but I'd not been a developer.
Right.
And Jim had worked with a lot.
Meaning you'd work on individual homes.
I'd worked on individual homes. I'd done my own work, minor stuff. And I've worked on beautiful custom homes.
Right.
I was working in the marketplace, okay? But I had not been a developer in the sense of skin in the game. We borrowed more zeros than how we did that, I don't know, but tapping into family and friends and the bank. And this is 1996 when we started. And so we had the green light. And what our approach might have been, it was a bit different. We didn't pre-sell. Because I know the community, I had a really good hunch of what the market was, even though there were no comps. And we were doing things that were radical in the sense of we didn't have garages, nor did we have parking that was attached to the houses. So people couldn't sleep with their cars. They could walk from the car door to the front door through the garden, and in doing so, have a time to chat, to notice the garden growing, to unwind while you're coming off the car world into your own personal world. Houses were 1 bedroom with an upstairs loft as a whole house, as a for sale whole house. And there were no comps for that. And so what we did was to jump in and build them all on spec, and then put them up for sale. We didn't want to have someone come in and said, oh, I like this, but I've got to I can't live without a garage, or I've got to have a bigger this or a bigger that. And we had to trust our hunches.
So for your own sake, you didn't want to potentially cave to someone's desires to make a sale and potentially in some way compromise the plan of the development. Is that the idea?
Yeah. And, as a developer, may not be a good idea of something that's untested, but we did. And the upside is that it sold out within a couple of months. And to empty nesters, single women, several, a young family. And within a very short time, the media picked up on it.
Was it community members that were, people that were existing Langley residents, or was it?
Both. There was a retired librarian. There was a therapist. There was a family who was working, I think, remotely from Microsoft at the time. They could afford anything. And they had a young child. They just wanted to live there. There was a local business owner who was there. I think there was another woman who moved to the island, loved it, and she lived there. She retired. So I was saying that the media picked up on it, and within a very short time, it was in 200 newspapers around the country. it was picked up by Metropolitan Home and Metropolis, and it was in Sunset magazine. Now, if you're in the West, that's the magazine for all of the West. You know, your grandparents, your parents probably got it, and it was highlighted in a feature story called "The Best New Neighborhood of the West."
Wow.
And it's like, oh, that's cool. In fact, that's amazing. And then the American Institute of Architects reached out and said, we'd like to find a way to highlight this, apply for the AIA Housing Award, National Housing Award. And so we did, and we won one of the major housing awards nationally. And then Sunset Magazine posted that. And then they did it yet again. They highlighted it in another 3 times that year.
Wow. And in what year is this?
I think that was after it was out and completed, 98, I believe.
98. Okay.
Yeah. And so Taunton Press, you may know of Fine Home Building.
Yeah.
So they had never done anything other than house or garden. And here, Sarah Susanka, who had been writing with them and wrote Creating the Not So Big House and so forth, she encouraged them to get an article going. And so they put an article together that was the largest article that Taunton Press had ever done on something that was not just house, it was community. And that went out to all of that audience. And then the NRDC had a whole story on this, featured it as a case study in solving sprawl. Anyway, my point is that we not only solved the needs and served the needs and desires for our little local community, but we tapped into the electric circuit for something that was national. And the phones were ringing from everywhere in the country. We're getting emails from all around and letters. And so we recognized that it was something far larger than we had anticipated.
What was that moment like when you realized I'm in little sleepy Langley, Washington, trying to pursue a life and not a career, and suddenly everything blows up? Did you and Jim have a sense of that while you were working on the project, or was the response much greater than you could have even anticipated?
Well, the response was much greater. How did this happen? I don't know. Did I feel that this was a worthy approach? Absolutely. We bet real money on it.
Yeah.
More than bet. I mean, we put real money into it. We put time into it. We rallied. We created a construction company to build it. We worked with, a number of local craftspeople. They were amazing, amazing craftspeople. We weren't paying attention to, oh, we've got to do this to get national attention. Oh, we've got to do this to get on the circuit. Not at all. I mean, we weren't paying attention at all, but it happened.
Yeah, it just happened. Yeah, you can't orchestrate things like that. Okay, so for the business people in the room, the builders in the room, how did the project work out on a pro forma?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We worked out the pro forma. We didn't just start in and just muck around until we're done and then sell it. We were pushed up against what we felt were the limits of the market at the time. And what's the market for a 1-bedroom house with no garage, with a shared area? And so we felt like, we've got to be able to sell these. I think we sold them low. I think there was a market. We would have waited longer maybe to sell them, but we pretty much just broke even, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. What it did, however, was to put us on the map. It demonstrated that this was a viable for break even. Is that viable? We didn't lose, but it also put us in a place where we were the only ones that have done this that we knew of anyway.
Yeah.
And so we did another one. And then we moved into Redmond, which is where Microsoft is located. We moved into Shoreline, a north suburb. We helped them rewrite the code or write a cottage housing code. Kirkland was putting together a demonstration code that said, look, we can come up with our own ideas, but they put out to the development and design community, come up with your own code. And then we may or may not use it. But if we choose, we'll say, go for it. But you can't just design it. You've got to build it, which we did. And we tested it. And the code that we put together said, okay, instead of double the density, let's allow larger houses up to 1,500 square feet and let's do 1.5 times the density. And so we built the Danielson Grove there. So the first one that we had done was a little bit like putting ourselves on the map, and it served us so well in years ahead.
And the questions that were coming in, as the phone starts ringing off the hook, who was it coming from? I mean, I assume builders and developers, but the questions that likely needed to be solved was, as you brought up, how can I get this into our code? That's the first step for all of this.
We're getting calls from city planners. What code did you use? Tell me more about it. From developers, give us more information on what you've been working with. From architects who were trying to say, oh, I've only dreamed of this. How do you find a client like this? Or could you help me think into this? I'm going to weave a couple things in related to an earlier question about and about your father, I think, in Pasadena.
Right.
Taunton Press was very interested at that time and saying, we'd like you to take this to more than an article. Could you write a book? And so I took time. It took 4 years, and I researched this typology. I had no idea. I didn't know about what had happened in Pasadena in 1912 in California. I didn't know about the wonderful camp communities, sort of summer camp religious communities on the East Coast, Chautauqua communities.
Right.
I didn't know about the almshouses in the Netherlands in the 1500s, where they were doing urban pocket neighborhoods for elders who had no children. And so these were pocket neighborhoods of apartments coming around a commons that had a well and had a place for meals and so forth. Or China. China has some great examples. Or Africa. And I realized that what I tapped into was this is not novel at all. This is part more of our human nature that we have forgotten as we've been dazzled by the automobile, dazzled by the things of Western culture. And what we were tapping into was things that were humans are sociable. We need sociability. We found that out during COVID. And pocket neighborhoods help speak to and deliver an opportunity to become sociable in an informal way. In writing the book, I named, which I had already done, but I had named what are the design characteristics, the design features of pocket neighborhoods that are more universal. So I was able to name those and put those into the book. But what I was doing was naming things that I think are not just novel. They've got a deeper basis in human nature. Things like outlook and refuge, things like layers of personal space for privacy, community. To live closer, we need more privacy. So how do you have houses that nest together? So you've got windows opening in our world to the south, to light, and on the north side would be high windows and skylights. So when you wake up in the morning and you open your window in your bedroom, you could say, hey, Levi, hey, how'd your night go? It's like, no, you've got privacy between nested houses. Porches, the importance of porches that are room size, not key fumbling porches, not faux porches, not places to sort of get out and just get into a house. Meanwhile, the life of your house is in the backyard around the barbecue where you don't see anybody. Flip the houses around to what they were before, where you're engaging a quiet street, a park. You're engaging something. So you've got room-sized porches that are both public and private. So these, I think, are part of more universal. In way in history, you may not have had porches like we imagine porches, but you'd have a front door bench, maybe with a little cover. And maybe you could see people coming and going in the lane or on the whatever. And maybe you want to slip inside. Maybe you want to engage in a chat. These settings allow for us as humans to live more fully and to have more agency in our lives. So I named all these, put it together in the book, and then the book has been out since 2011. And it was last year number 16 in urban planning and design on the Amazon bestseller list. It's like, that's amazing.
It's a phenomenal book, and I think you wrote it in such a way that it's really digestible. It's got the key design element. You have good visual features for everything, and it's probably at Wins Company, one of our most referenced books.
Oh,
We've done a couple pocket neighborhoods, and now we're doing kind of more of a town building, a larger scale development. We're still trying to work with that pattern of pocket neighborhoods. And yeah, the sort of pattern writing that you have, I know that Christopher Alexander has been really impactful,
right.
in your thinking, and just a major influence. In fact, I have a fun story from last year at a conference when I ran into you with a friend, and my friend was telling you that he just finished reading Christopher Alexander and asked you what book he should read next. And after pondering for a moment or two, you just said, "I think you should read Alexander again." That was your wisdom, which that really stuck with me, because Alexander does have so much depth, and I think that you took a lot of his writing and applied it in this way. But what was it about his work and writing that really struck a chord with you?
Well, for people in the audience who may not know, Christopher Alexander was an architect, a theorist, a builder. He passed away a couple of years ago. And in the 60s and 70s, he was looking at places anywhere in the world that were successful, that were timeless, that were loved, that were places that had so much life for the community and for the people that lived there. And he said, why? And he took the why to such a deep level, and he recognized that there are elements that come together that create places that are satisfying. For example, in a room that feels warm and balanced, instead of a window on one side that's like a porthole that creates glare, you've got windows on two sides that balances light in a room and makes the room more spacious. And so that's a pattern called light on two sides. I mentioned front door bench. Another one that's related to that would be a pattern called entrance transition. And the pattern would say, between the public life of the street, of the automobile, whatever, and the interior house, there's a transition that when it's done well, be it either in an urban setting or in a rural setting or country setting, there's a transition between the public world and your front door. Take that as almost a room in itself. And you might have the path to the front door maybe bend a little bit. Maybe there is some plantings. Maybe there's a tree that comes and provides a little shelter or shade. So you've got a layering between the street and the front door. Have the front door be visible from the street, so you're not wondering, oh, where do I enter? What do I do? So this is a pattern called entrance transition. House for a small family is another one. And it would say, with a house for a small family, rather than having the suburban rambler model where you've got all the bedrooms in one wing and the living space here, that's fine when children are really young. But when you've got teenagers, you've got their natural tendencies, their natural inclinations for music or for whatever, and you've got clashes between parents and teenagers. You need to acknowledge families at different stages of life. So, house for a small family pattern would say family commons, the living space, kitchen, eating area, living space. And then one side would be the parents' realm, and then on the other side, the children's realm. And they come together through the common space. And so you don't have the children's realm going directly outside of the street. It comes through the shared space. And so that's house for small family that gives both autonomy and coherence for the family itself. Patterns work on the largest scale, from regions to towns to neighborhoods to clusters to buildings themselves to gardens to rooms to details. And so a pattern language, this is my first edition of it. A pattern language looks like a Bible. It's not the definitive. The pattern language is really an approach that looks at patterns across a range of scales that come together that are related. So we've got a small pattern, a front door bench related to entrance transition, related to a house, related to maybe a pedestrian street. These are woven together in languages, in constellations, in interrelationships. And what was, I don't want to say revolutionary, but what was really something about a pattern language is that it saw the world not as a collection of parts and pieces, but as a constellation of elements that together created something larger. Different worldview. It looked at the spaces between and the life within the environments that we create rather than the objects and artifacts, rather than the buildings. Yes, buildings, but how do the buildings augment life and thriving communities? Rather than how are they so enticing and alluring that you can just see them in the latest architecture magazine and dwell and so forth. Those magazines focus in on the allure of the object rather than on the life. And he was really looking at the life. And for me, I didn't realize, but from very early along, I think that, yes, I'm an architect. Yes, I just really focus on detail to such a degree. But I'm really interested is I'm dialing in this detail. How does it affect the opportunity for how does it encourage and engage the people who live there to live well, to live large, to live in a wholesome way, to create thriving community? I recognized later in my life that I was very attuned to that sensibility.
So for the average person listening, there's a constellation of patterns and all of these different variables that play in, and it sounds like, wow, that sounds very complicated and like a lot of design, and I could never achieve that. Could you break it down, maybe in the pocket neighborhood sense of just follow one of those pattern lines and how each one kind of stacks on top of each other and is very practical in its application? It just needs to be actually written down, and it's a logical pattern to be followed.
Yes, and what comes to mind in relation to this question is that you mentioned that you and your dad had done pocket neighborhoods, but now you're doing larger neighborhoods. Okay, well, what you can begin to think about is that there are patterns at the house cluster scale that hold the patterns of the home scale and the garden scale. But when you have larger communities, you've got other sets of interrelated patterns at that next larger scale. For example, the first pattern that I think is quite universal for pocket neighborhoods. We mentioned sociability. Pocket neighborhoods tap into the human scale of sociability in small groups, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 people. Conversation is spontaneous. We're here. We've got this dialogue. It's following something. We're listening to one another. If you could be in a group, you can't help but engage with other people. It's who we are as humans. Pocket neighborhoods are designed around the scale of sociability. So groups of 6, 8, 10, maybe 12, but basically groups of nearby neighbors. If you've got a larger neighborhood, I would suggest that you've got other both pockets as well as homes that are engaging maybe a quiet street that would have a loose sense of the scale of sociability, not a pocket classic cottage court, but the sociability among nearby neighbors, maybe on a quiet street. So you've got the molecule, if you will, of the sociability. You could ramp up. I've done projects that are 30 acres in size. And sociability is woven in through the entire community through this sensibility. So the scale of sociability would be probably one of the most important patterns.
For the town builders listening, if they want to take what you're talking about and apply it at the larger scale, if the pocket neighborhood is one building block, what's surrounding that? Is it more building blocks of pocket neighborhoods, and maybe more importantly, what is the glue or what is the connective tissue between these building blocks that allows you to scale across the transect in these larger environments and mixed use environments?
Great question. Some people have said, "Oh gosh, I love pocket neighborhoods." Stamp, 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 stamp. It doesn't work.
And even so, you see it, one thing that burns me in doing kind of more the master plan communities, 100 acres or so, is when you're flying over towns, it's so common to see these cul-de-sac communities where they're very isolated and there might be vibrancy within it, but the sad part is that vibrancy is cut off to just that.
Right.
Just that area. It's not connected, and it's not feeding anything else. It's just all interior focus, which the pocket neighborhood is focused towards the green and there's privacy there. But how do you allow that community and the vibrancy that's being created there to trickle out?
We could spend hours on these questions. These are really good, which I have. I did a course for ULI, and I think it was really helpful especially for developers. Let's see if I can pull a thread. I wrote a model code for larger sites because the cottage court codes are designed for infill, primarily urban sites or suburban sites, but basically infill within a larger development. What do you do when you've got 3 acres or 5 or 40 acres? So there's a code that would say, let's highlight sociability and privacy. And how do you have those work together? How do you have more standard homes with garages connecting in a way that encourages sociability but allows for personal refuge? So have a rear lane to get the cars out of the way. Activate the rear lane so it's not just wall-to-wall garage doors, but it might have backyard gardens, or it might have live above ADUs above the garages, so you got eyes on the alley. But don't call it an alley, call it a lane. Maybe you've got a little pea patch garden. And then the front of a house on a town planned lot would have a room-sized porch facing a street, and there would be the entry transition from the parking on the street with street trees, and then you come into the house. And so you've got the transition, you've got the life, you've got the living room, kitchen, the active rooms of the home facing the shared quiet street. And then you've got maybe to the side as your side yard, and your rear yard as your own private garden. And so the rear lane might dovetail with a cottage court that would have the lane being the place for parking, and then the cottage court being a whole different typology. But they dovetail so well, really well. And so you've got those. And there might be a combination of live-abouts, or I've done one down in Dallas. We've got a plan for homes that would be the shared common area for the sub community. And above that are a series of small micro apartments. And then we've done townhomes as part of it. We've done apartments as part of it. So anyway, the code that I mentioned is on my website, rosschapin.com. The new Ross Chapin, I'm redoing my website, pocket-neighborhoods.net has a place. And if you look at codes for courtyards, you follow there, and if you can't find it, reach out to me and I'll highlight it. But I'll have a new website up in a few weeks, and I've got a whole section on this. But I think it's really important for town builders to know that cottage courts and pocket neighborhoods are one part of a toolbox. What holds the toolbox together is thriving community, is walkable, human scale, is tied to the wider world. And so you don't have gated, closed off communities. You don't have 10-acre blocks of subdivisions. You've got a wider neighborhood that's connected through a pathway network, through parks, dog parks, forest areas. It's a constellation. And if you look at patterns, you can then begin to visualize how those patterns at the town scale come together. And it's fascinating. You can see, oh, here's a semi-public park, semi-private park, and these are pocket neighborhoods. So here's a group of homes around a quiet street, which has a corner park and has a place for community amenities there. And here's a place for a neighborhood center, or for, as I mentioned, a dog park or a community garden. These are all elements that fit within that.
Town Builders is brought to you by Brett Jones, PA. Brett is a practicing land use lawyer in Florida, and as a patron and advocate for new urbanism, he leverages his background in corporate law and personal development experience to help landowners and developers get entitlements and cut through red tape to build human-centric, walkable neighborhoods. Visit brettjonespa.com to find out more. And would this type of pattern writing differ from, a smart code? Or are these two different terms? Are we speaking about the same thing?
Good question. Pattern writing is how do you put together a group of patterns that bring life to a project? And I just gave a short course to a group of builders and developers on pattern writing. And I want to say that, a lot of our work is out in the media. You can see it. Look up pocket neighborhoods, and everywhere you're going to see, this. And so I'm seeing literally hundreds of projects around the country. And I wish that they would pay attention to maybe the book, pay attention to some of these key essentials, because while they look like, in their version, what they think looks like a pocket neighborhood, it's got cottage style. Style has nothing to do with it. Does it have scale of sociability? Does it have layers of personal space? Does it have nested houses? Is the car corralled? Is there eyes on shared space? What about common ground, and how does that work? How does it connect and contribute to the wider neighborhood rather than just being signed off? They're often missing the key features for a positive, livable community. And so how do you get there? And I think the pattern writing is, if you will, I'm looking for a metaphor. Let's call it the DNA that generates the plan. So rather than designing a master plan, which is another way of sort of seeing all this perfect design coming together. Oh, and you've got this master plan, and you could highlight it and you could make some pretty pictures. That's more of world as thing, world as parts. This is just a larger part, and you've got a master player. I think what we're talking about is something that, what's going on at a more personal level? What are the needs? What are the issues? What are the concerns? What are the opportunities? What would be maybe the pearls that could come together? And so when those patterns emerge from that kind of listening, I'm working with a group in rural Kentucky, and I was brought in to design a pocket neighborhood. And I'm teaming up with another architect to do this. It's too far away. And I recognize that, a pocket neighborhood is not the first issue that they had. And so I was listening to the people in the community, to the issues. And we realized that we could take those issues, and they were really needing to look at revitalizing the town itself. It was a small town that it was bypassed by the highway, and everything was sort of gutted from the town. Well, how do you revitalize? What would be the starting points to do that? And so we put together a pattern language that worked for the town as a whole, for different parts of the town. And then we worked on a pattern language for a site that they had chosen, which was probably 3/4 of a city block. So we worked on a pattern language. And when we highlighted the key patterns, and from there developed the plan. And what's good is that a pattern language allows for the detail to be done. You've got a great idea. As you do that idea, you are enriching, enlivening, serving the larger pattern of which you're a part of, the larger context. And then you're making space for something smaller. Example. Here's your pocket neighborhood site. For the Midwest, the elm trees disappeared, or they're spotty, and you've got big tree and then no trees for much of the block. So there's a missing something that made this street, which used to be beautiful, into something that's just like, what happened? So your work, as you serve yourself, would say, well, let's plant a series of street trees in a way that form this beautiful arch over the street. let's have a piece that would say between the property line and the street would be a place for walking, planting, street trees, narrow streets for quiet street. So that would be a pattern. So you're always thinking detail, but when you've got the structure, the DNA, it is always nested in the larger. It's always nested in the context. So rather than having an action be made, take a look at anywhere in our Western world. Why do we have ugliness? Because we have people acting on their own accord rather than connecting and contributing to what's around. How do you repair what's broken? How do you preserve what really works? Shift that sensibility from self on a pedestal, self on, I can do whatever I damn well please. This is property rights, to we are in a community. We share the commons. We are stronger together. There needs to be a place for everyone, for the elder to live in a community with dignity, for teenagers, for young people, for families. I'm working on a project for a pocket neighborhood for people with adults with special needs, autism and Downs, with their families and caregivers nested within the wider neighborhood. There needs to be a place for everyone. Everyone has a gift. And when we as builders and developers and designers think about, rather than plans and projects and pro formas and metrics, and there's a lot of risk to getting these things done. Yes, and what are the deeper human needs individually? What are the human needs socially within the next larger scale that we're a part of? We're creating communities. What might the life of those communities be? So there's just, if I have anything to offer, it might be just shift of sensibilities.
Right.
From individual, from parts and pieces to more of wholeness, to recognizing that life emerges rather than is constructed. Metaphorically, you're not going to just construct a flower. If we could be nature, have the seed and it goes through its whatever, and eventually in its life will be the flower, and then the flower will fade away and it will be something else. You're going to create something more like an ecosystem of sub niches. And there's room for improvisation, shifting metaphor again. There's room for all the different impulses of the elements within the ecosystem that serve themselves while taking part in the whole.
Well, and I think that's where you've done, a great service, is in being so proactive and putting out your work and talking about these things, because I think that the American sensibility is, it's different here than it is in South America or Europe, and we're a little bit more individualistic, and we like our things, we like our space, but everyone relates to the growth patterns of a family, multi-generational living, how are kids being raised, how are we creating safe environments for them. But that conversation is not happening at all. The average American is not thinking about their built environment on a daily basis. And so I do think that if that happens, there will be a difference being made. One of the issues that I see, actually one of my initial heart changes that really made me passionate about development, was recognizing the housing crisis that we're in. And because we're in such a housing shortage, just basic supply and demand, the national builders don't have any prerogative to change their pattern of development. I mean, they could build the same home 30 times and sell it because there's demand for it, and so I see that as a negative social impact. But the way to change that is to simply show a different way of it happening, and I think the market will respond to that. And I think even the national builders will respond to that if the market gets created, for, hey, let's stop thinking simply about our standard of living and making sure that we have our 2-car garage and, our flat screen TV and whatever it is. Let's start thinking a little bit more about quality of life. And emotionally, you can sell that all day. At a certain point, I think there will be a tipping point where that becomes the conversation.
I want to highlight when we did our first project with no comps, and it had not been done before. What we recognized is that we were a niche. All we needed to do was to sell 8 homes. It wasn't 800. That would have really tested the depth of the market. And I think it would have been too much. It would have been not appropriate. But we were a few homes. When I'm working with developers, I start provide a range of homes. Don't be your own competition. So have a home that would be absolutely wonderful for an elder who wants to live near the grandkids in a dignified place where they've got others around them. Have a place for family. Have a place for a young couple, pre-kids, within the community. Have a place with a live above. Welcome everyone. And so when you sell it, first of all, you're selling to people. Put out your key values that you have. What are the key ideas? Be very explicit with that. The people that will be attracted to that will come because of those. Competition? There's nobody like it. Well, it's not true. There's more people like it. There's more projects like this. But if you are right now in our country, don't try to follow the herd. Craft something that's well thought through, that has the key ideas, put them out, and don't say yes to the first person who's got a green just coming out of their wallet because it looks good. You want to have people that are going to be advocates. You want to have people who are going to say, oh my God, I can't find this anywhere. This is fantastic. So don't sell to everybody. Start small. Do a few. Test it. What's the reception like? What did I learn? Both positive as well as what did I learn that I might do differently the next time? And then to move forward with that.
What's your experience with the governance of these areas? And maybe specific to your projects, do you have HOAs? I'll tell you just a quick story. The first project that we did up here was 12 cottages, little commons building around a green. And most of the people, in fact, all the people except one person, didn't move in because of the community. One person recognized it as hey, I've seen a guy do this. I saw this in a Sunset magazine once or something like that. And they were really excited. And in fact, I had lots of Ross Chapin conversations with them because after they moved in, they loved the idea so much. And they just kind of like poured themselves into learning more about cottage neighborhoods. To your point earlier, it was a mix of people, a lot of single ladies, a couple young families, empty nesters. The president of the university moved out of his mansion into one of these homes. It was a $300,000 cottage, and they wanted it to downsize, and they liked it, and they could downsize, but the quality of the home and the quality of the build was still nice. And so it was a great experience. But we set up an HOA, and I checked in recently, so this was 2 or 3 years, and that couple that was so excited about the community, and they had a lot of community-based things that were going on there. They said that they're actually moving. They're not moving because of the community, but I was just, getting a temperature on it. And they said that there's just become, especially one person that has just created kind of vitriol, across the community to the point that like no one sits on their front porches anymore and talks. And, there's little HOA disputes and problems like that. And I think I think in a lot of ways, that's what people fear, that when you introduce yourself to a group of people, you open yourself up that way to a pocket neighborhood and you say, I'm going to share this space with people. You don't know who you're going to be sharing that space with, and you don't know how they're going to act necessarily. And so what's your experience or advice there?
So glad you're bringing this up because a lot of the tension has been on the pocket neighborhood itself, the design. And integrating thoughtful design patterns into a plan provides a base of support for well-being and for engaged community. But when residents move in, relationships can deteriorate. Ultimately, I think creating healthy community culture requires what you're talking about, governance, management, maintenance practices that prioritize participation, social engagement, creates a meme of respect, of shared responsibility. A lot of what this is based on is something that maybe we should have remembered from kindergarten around sharing, around, resolving disputes. Johnny, no, don't hit Steve. You can talk it through. You can, whatever. It's okay to have emotions. So all of that emotional intelligence kind of stuff. And a lot of it is that a lot of us have grown up in a world that doesn't prioritize that or emphasize that. We don't get strokes for that. And so we're in adult bodies with other ways of dealing with disputes and differences. So I have told developers of community-oriented projects, when you begin a project, budget a community facilitator who might help residents develop tools and skills for resolving disputes, for making decisions, for promoting community life. So the skilled facilitator can help residents navigate the inevitable challenges of community life in ways that build rather than erode social capital. They can model, they can teach effective meeting facilitation, how to resolve disputes, community building practices that they can then maintain independently. So the facilitator starts on, maybe they help market it, maybe they help filter and help people choose what's right for them. And then once they get going, they set up the culture of community, the meme of community. How do you, it's not like you don't have conflicts. How do you work with those conflicts in a way that makes something more rewarding rather than corrosive? So I think this investment in the social infrastructure pays dividends in reduced management costs, in lower turnover, and a development of a stable community that becomes an asset rather than a liability.
On top of that community facilitator, I assume that you have a regular HOA that's set up to do, maintenance on the common area and that sort of thing.
So I think HOAs work at small scale. Now, HOAs can be gnarly. I know that. I've been a part of some. But I think when you're on a face-to-face basis, if you're in an HOA with 100 residents, nobody wants to serve on the board. Something comes up, you've got to be, the board police coming in, and then you've got these disputes that come out, and that's no good. I think if governance is taken down and maintenance is taken down to the smallest scale, it makes sense. Rather than having the larger HOA for a wide neighborhood determine what happens within the court, have the court be governed and maintained by the people that are there, following agreements among themselves that might have suggested agreements around what happens there with sound, with messiness, with toys, with dogs, with cats, with get that worked out early and then pay attention. Think about agreements rather than rules. Could be the same thing, but a rule is something that is top down. Am I following it or not following it? Whereas an agreement is, I recognize you, and I hear that you're recognizing me, and we will have an agreement together around dogs in a community. Agreements around sound. I might be up late at night, playing my favorite jazz music, and you can call me up and say, you don't have to call me up and just read the rule book to me, because we've helped maybe weed the hedge on a monthly work meeting, because we've been sharing a barbecue together. We've got a rapport together. I know about your young kids. I know about your whatever through conversation. And when these disputes come up around sound, for example, you're on a more personal basis rather than going through the channel of a property manager to try to, resolve these.
Yeah, so it's more of setting up that social construct of, hey, if you're, it's the CC&Rs, but it's the neighborhood agreement. And hey, if you're moving in here, these are the things that we've discussed as a community that we, agree upon, and you'll be asked to sign that same agreement to just create a thriving community. And we have, ways of resolving issues that, as you say, are inevitable. We're humans.
Right. Our co-housing cousins have been working on this for decades, and they've got a great toolbox of tools around all of this. How do you create healthy community? How do you resolve disputes? How do you make decisions, large and small? What's the scale of governance? How do you work with that? Co-housing, they've got their whole package. One of the things that I recognize that co-housing has is that they are intentional community. They're people who intentionally want to live in a place where there are shared spaces, maybe shared amenities, shared buildings. Generally, the shared part is pretty significant. They've got significant community buildings. I've done pocket neighborhoods where the shared space might be a a tool shed for the one lawnmower and the rakes and shovels and the various different things that you need, and the one ladder. And you can't afford a big building, so you've got a place for an outdoor barbecue. Maybe it's got a shelter, a sun shelter. It's very little, not a lot to take care of, but it is common elements that bring people together nonetheless. So co-housing is intentional with shared things, and they've got a lot of tools. I'm looking at, and I haven't answered the question, how important is it to be intentional? I think I would probably say, this relates to our conversation a few minutes ago, don't sell to everyone. Have the filtering from both sides. Call it fit. Don't sell anything. Find the fit. Is this right for where you are, for what you think and how you want to live? And don't sell immediately. It may be that they're brought in. It's hard when you first get started, but maybe they're brought into a potluck is happening or a monthly work party, and hang out on the porch with some of the neighbors, have conversations. It might be that once they do, they go, "Man, this is great, but oh man, I think it's going to be a problem for the way that I want to live." So find the fit. Don't have the attention only on getting out the backside as a developer. When that happens, you may have a group of residents that maybe got some bad apples, and they may come back and go for a lawsuit. Happy homeowners, happy neighbors can be your advocates and can resolve issues amicably within reason without going to lawyers and doing that whole number. So if you're building for sale, I think that's really critical.
And we don't know, as you mentioned, we don't know how to relate to each other. There's this weird thing that like we were taught manners growing up, but maybe it's this digital age that we're in, but our ways to resolve things seem to be lawsuits and taking it to extreme levels instead of just being human with one another and understanding these things are going to come up, and it's like me and you can resolve that. And I think that it's part of it is a framing in people's minds. I noticed this just as another anecdote with one of our homeowners in a different neighborhood, as she was just going on and on about how she loved it and how she lived in her last spot for like 6 years and she didn't get to know either one of her neighbors. She's like, I didn't have a conversation with my neighbor in 6 years because we hardly saw each other, and she didn't really talk to me, and she was, whatever. But here everyone says hi and they're so nice. And I just kind of brought up to her, I was like, well, maybe the case is that everyone is nice. Oh, this is what it was. She said she needed to interview whoever the person moved in next to her, because she said everyone here is so nice and I don't want to mess that up. And I said, well, maybe that neighbor that lived next to you for so many years, you don't know anything about her. She could have been a great neighbor, but the fact is you never once had a conversation with her. So you kind of alienated her in your mind. Whereas here, everyone is forced to interact in some way if you're going to go out into the public space. And people are generally nice. We do know how to have manners and say hi, and even a little hi and a smile has a great impact on someone. And you're like, that's a nice person. So I think that we're just not used to that type of community anymore. So it feels foreign and it's odd to people.
I think if there are opportunities for people to come together, they will. I highlighted a community in Minneapolis. It was historic brick worker houses right near downtown Minneapolis. And when I lived there, it went from being abandoned and torn down, and the entire neighborhood was up for urban renewal. And the people who lived there were so passionate about it. And they pushed the city to say, no, don't do urban renewal. In fact, take the street, which is maybe not the best going on, and we're going to reclaim the street. And so they had the city make the street for that block, actually a couple of blocks, as a shared area for a pedestrian walkway. It's owned by the city, but it's a shared walkway. And at the end, between where the blocks come together, there's parking and there's a children's play area. There's no common house. There's no HOA in the big way. I think there's an HOA related to, who cares for the playground. And it's a place where down next to the playground is a little covered shelter with a barbecue. And you can bet at the end of a, summer day at work, that barbecue is fired up and kids are playing on the swings and you've got conversations going on. It's not a tight and closed insular cottage court pocket neighborhood. It's part of a community within anywhere, and it's working. And some people may be communitarian, and others will be more to themselves. And yet, the comings and goings, you're going to see someone. They're not forced, but they're enabled. They're encouraged. They're fostered by the fact that you come out into this center space that used to be a street, and you're walking past to get everybody parks their car in the back lane, but there's also additional parking, and then there's this common area at the cross street.
Well, and that's what I love about what we're talking is that encouragement of the encouragement of community. I think there's a quote from your book there, like, humans are gregarious by nature,
right,
but we'll create community if given the opportunity, or we'll socialize if given the opportunity.
Right, that's right.
Well, Ross, it's just phenomenal talking to you, and thank you for taking the time to just share your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. Just on your way out, how can people follow along with what you're doing, find your book, find your website, and just follow along with all the stuff that you're coming out with?
Well, we talked about the Pocket Neighborhoods book, local bookstore, Amazon, it's there. It's been republished, so it should be very available. Within a few weeks, I'm going to update rosschapin.com and include a whole section on pocket neighborhoods. And then I've got a whole section called Good Fit Homes, the Good Fit Collection, and offering probably 100 plans that we've done in many of our communities that will be available for developers or individuals to purchase. The Pocket Neighborhood section right now, and you can still get at it through pocket-neighborhoods, plural.net. Awkward, go for it. It's got a lot of the information that we covered today within it, and I think it'll be more available in the next iteration, but a lot of it's there right now. And then if people are interested, I'm looking ahead to the next part of my work and my life, and I would like to find a way to share some of this in more pragmatic ways, both big picture, what's the philosophy around this, but also how do we work with it? And so there could be some working groups around this. I haven't shaped this yet, but I'm working on thinking about it.
Great. Well, Ross, thank you again. And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening.
Sounds great. Wonderful to be with you.